What's up guys, Justin here with the CGEssentials.com. So in today's video we're going to check out a Blender add-on that makes the creation of HDRI backgrounds and domes really easy. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so HDRI Maker is a tool that automates the HDRI setup inside of Blender. So instead of you having to mess around with a bunch of nodes or anything like that, this is going to automate that process. Now, not only will it automate the process of creating HDRI backgrounds, which can definitely be a time saver, it also gives you the ability to quickly create domes with the backgrounds applied to them as well. So you can light your model, but then also have a dome that actually has ground on it that your object casts a shadow on. And so that can be a significant time saver when you start setting up domes as well. Now, there are tools in here that you can use in order to edit and customize the domes that are created, which we can talk about in a little bit. But this is definitely a cool tool for quickly setting up these HDRIs. So note that there are a couple different versions of this. So the full version contains libraries up to 16K. You can also get some of these other versions that have the lower resolution HDRIs in there as well. So for example, there's very rare situations where I would actually use a 16K HDRI. So for me, that wouldn't really make sense, but depending on what you're trying to do, it might make more sense. Note that there are 480 backgrounds included with this add-on. This does also come with a tool set to quickly create a light studio, allowing you to create a solid color backdrop as well as quickly adding lights in order to light your model. So we'll take a look at that as well. All right, so first off, let's talk a little bit about what happens when you install this add-on, because the way this is going to work is depending on the version that you get, this may look a little bit different. So if you get the 16K version, this is what this is going to look like, but notice how you have options in here with this version in order to download the 1K, 2K, 4K, etc., as well as the actual add-on itself. So you're always going to download the add-on and then you're going to install it like any other add-on in Blender. And then down below, these are basically like zip files containing all of the different HDRIs. Now there's more of them as you get into the 4Ks and the 8Ks because those are higher resolution and they take up more space. So he had to split them into multiple groups of packs. So you can download whatever you want. I went with the 2K just for demonstration's sake, but you can really download whatever you want. Then what you need to do is you need to jump over into Blender, and under Edit Preferences, you need to jump into your add-ons and you need to install that first zip file. That's the HDRI zip file. That's the HDRI Maker zip file. And so when you do that, you're going to get a little drop down that looks something like this. And so this is where you're going to be able to control different things about the add-on. And in particular, we want to focus on the install and the libraries tabs. Mostly we're just going to focus on the install tab actually. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to select a path where you want your default library to go, and then you need to select a path where your user library is going to go. So I have both of these on my assets folder, but you basically just click on this, it's going to pop up a little window and you can select a location. So you need to set both of those library folders, and then what you want to do is you want to go find those JETPACKs that I just showed you over on Blender Market. And so for me, all I did is I clicked on this 2K Volume 1 JETPACK and I clicked on Choose JETPACKs. That should take the JETPACKs and put them in this folder for use. And so once you've done that, you should be able to access these over in the HDRI Maker window. This is an example model I've downloaded from SKETCHFAB. This is the Cat with Jetpack by Miru. So I'll link to it in the notes down below. Let's say that we wanted to add an HDRI using HDRI Maker. What you can do is you can tap on the N key on your keyboard, the letter N, and then you want to click on HDRI Maker. And what that's going to do is that's going to pop out the HDRI Maker Studio window right here. And you can use this, or I guess we could call it more of a toolbar, but you can basically use this in order to access both the HDRI Maker library as well as your own custom user library if you have one of those. But say that we wanted to add an HDRI background in here. We would go to the HDRI Maker library, and let's say that we wanted to add a studio. So all of these are different HDRI types, right? So you've got like garage, you've got interior. So those are going to be the interiors of buildings. You've also got interior public or interior studio. So there's a lot of different kinds of HDRIs that come along with this. In this case, we're going to focus on interior studio. Let's go ahead and just we'll just select this option right here. So say you wanted to add that HDRI image in here, all you have to do is click on the button for add. And so notice how in material preview mode, nothing happened. Right? Well, the reason that nothing happened is because this is something that only shows up when you render it. But if I click over into rendered mode right here, notice how I've got that background right here. So I've got the lighting from that HDRI. And so notice what that does is this sets this up as an HDRI background. And at the moment, it's literally just acting as a background, right? It's not doing anything else. So it's just kind of back here. Notice how if I zoom out, it's not changing size or anything like this. But you can come in here and adjust things like the angle. All right, so let's go ahead and jump over into cycles. And I'm gonna go ahead and switch this to GP compute mode just so you can see what this does when you're rendering in cycles. And so notice how if you make adjustments using the angle function, the lighting in your scene, including things like the shadows right here, is going to adjust along with this. So this is using the lighting from your HDRI image in order to light your scene. And I'm going to jump back into Eevee just so things run a little bit faster. Now, notice that you can adjust things like the brightness using the emission, as well as the exposure and the hue and the saturation, right? So the hue and saturation is going to kind of change the colors inside of your scene that are generated from this HDRI image. So another thing you could do if you wanted to is you could use the lighting from this HDRI image, but then check the box for transparent background. That's going to light your image using the HDRI, but notice how it doesn't actually show up in the background anymore. So this is easily like masking out that background if you wanted to do that. Now, in addition, you can also, if you don't want to use the HDRI image, you can click on the option for use solid color. If you do that, what that's going to do is that's going to block out the HDRI, and that's going to allow you to add a color in here as your HDRI instead. So I can use this in order to set this color, but then I could also set the transparent background if I wanted to. So you can come in here and adjust this so that it's only using a color as a background instead. So we could do like a fully white background or something like that. Okay, so far this is pretty simple, right? This is something that you could set up pretty easily without using this add-on. However, where I think this add-on really makes a lot of sense is in the ability to quickly create domes. So let's say that we wanted to take this model, and let's say that we wanted to just put it in an outdoor location. So maybe like an open world or something like that. So what you can do is you can click through and notice how there's a number of other HDRIs in here. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and click on one of them. I'm gonna click on add. But what I want to do, because I don't really like the way the background's in here and the way this kind of floats in space, I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to click on the option for dome. And so what the dome is going to do is this is going to automatically set up a dome and apply this HDRI to it so that it actually acts as like ground geometry. So the way that works is if I click on add dome, notice what that's going to do is that is actually going to set up a dome using that HDRI image in here. And so my model is kind of centered in the middle of this, but notice how now instead of just kind of floating in space, this is actually projecting the HDRI image on the ground. And so it may not look like too much right here, though obviously the result is already significantly better. Let's say I was to toggle back into cycles, notice that that shadow is actually being cast on the ground based on the lighting from this HDRI. And your shadow will adjust based on the rotation of the HDRI. One of the cool things about this, and I'm going to jump back into Eevee, just for performance sake. But another one of the cool things about this is you can also go into the dome properties and adjust them. So notice how I have an option to hide the dome, which we don't really want. You can also scale the dome up or down. And so notice how the more you scale the dome, the larger the dome gets. So you can use this to create a really large dome. You can keep it small, other things like that. But then you can also rotate the dome 360 degrees. So notice how this is rotating around my model, just like this. And this dome setup is just super easy. You can also see the wireframe of the dome in here as well. Okay, and so one of the really cool things about this is say that I didn't want this ground to be flat, right? So say I wanted to use this in order to create something that doesn't really have this like ultra flat ground in here. Well, you can actually add geometry. So let's say I was to add something from like, we'll call it Ant Landscapes for right now, the add-on for that, which I can link to in the notes down below. But let's say you didn't want this to be super flat. You wanted this to have some more ups and downs. Maybe we'll make this a little bit bigger, something like this, right? So it's basically just a mesh that's being created using procedural noise in here. You could adjust other things about it as well. I'm not going to worry too much about that for right now. But let's say we wanted this to match the ground. Well, all we have to do is this is a mesh type, right? Well, I can come over here and look at this mesh type, and then under ground, there's an option in here for add ground. And so when we do that, what that's going to do is that is going to take the texture that's from the ground or the bottom of the dome, and that's going to apply it to our ground object. So now, if we take a look at this and we look at our render, notice how this isn't flat anymore. This actually looks like rocky ground. So this actually looks really cool. Do note that this would look even better if I had downloaded the 8K textures or the 16K. Those files get really big, so I did this more for like a speed standpoint. But again, you can come in here and you can adjust the angle of the dome. Well, notice how when we adjust the angle of the dome, that ground mesh is tied to that, and that is adjusting as well. So we can use this to really quickly add that ground detail from our dome bottom, which I think is one of the better features contained inside of this tool. It's super cool. Okay, so one of the cool things that was added in this new version is this actually gives you the ability to actually adjust these. So let's say, for example, that we were to add this abandoned building in here. I'm gonna go ahead and add it. And we don't just want it as a background, we actually want it in here as a dome. Well, notice how there's two kinds of domes in here, the cube and the cylinder, that actually allow you to adjust the way this is mapped using the hooks function. So the way this works is if we click on add dome, what that's going to do is that's going to add this dome in here. And first thing we're going to notice is if we look at this, the projection's not right. Right? So if we look at this dome, for example, the scale of the dome has this so that our columns are projected in a way that they're getting bent onto the ground, right? And sometimes I find that toggling this wireframe on is helpful. So if you click on the display wire under your dome properties. But what we want to do in this situation is we actually want to go down into our dome vectors, and we can actually adjust the way that this is in here. So for example, we can use this to adjust the scale of the ground that's in here. So notice I can scale this up, so I'm not getting that kind of like weird ground distortion over here by that column. And we can come in here and adjust that size or scale of that dome as well if it's getting too big. You may have to go back in and make some adjustments though. So you can still adjust things like your ground scale, other things like that, in order to get those kind of lined up in here. So there's also an option in here for coming in here and adding hooks. And so what adding hooks is going to do is it's basically going to add points in here that you can use in order to adjust the way that this is placed in here. So notice how, for example, I can move this hook around. When I move this hook around, what that's doing is that's actually adjusting the way this is projected, and it's actually adjusting the mesh that's in here. So you could adjust like multiple hooks if you wanted to. So let's say that we wanted to bring this one closer. I could do a G, Y, and I can start kind of like bringing this in and actually adjusting the way that this is placed inside of our 3D space right here. So it actually gives us a ton of control over the way that our HDRI images are placed in here. So there's a full tutorial on this, which I'll link to in the notes down below. It's one I kind of want to practice with a little bit more to feel 100% confident with, but this does give you the ability to really kind of adjust those projections in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get if you're doing this manually without having to do a lot of extra work. All right, so you can also create and save your own backgrounds into your user library. So the way that that works is there's an option down below for save. And so when you save, what you want to do is you want to choose a source folder. So in my case, I've put 4 HDR files. I think I got them all from HDRI Haven into this HDRI import folder. And what you can do is you can click and drag and select them. And when you do that, you can click on choose path. And so when you do that, that's going to find the path right here. And what you can do is you can use this option to do a batch save. Now, in this case, what you might want to do is you might want to create your own collection in the user library folder. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on add new category. And I'm just going to call this Justin's HDRI files. I'm going to click on yes in order to create this and click on OK. So that's going to create a category that I can save these to. But now if I click on batch save, it's going to go through and it's going to save those 4 files in here. Now you can click on the file list and exclude some of them if you want. We're not going to do that. We're just going to click on yes. We're going to click on OK. And so what that's going to do is that's going to batch save those 4 HDRIs, and it's actually going to bring them in and do kind of a batch creation thing. So it's going to bring them in and it's going to save them to your user folder. And so if I go into my user library and I look under Justin's HDRI files, notice how those 4 files that were in there are now created as HDRIs that I can bring in. So I can click on add, I can add them to a dome if I want to do that. So we can go into the dome function. They're going to function in exactly the way that we want them to function inside of this 3D space right here. So you can use this in order to create and save your own files to this library. And so you can also create HDRI files from your 3D models. So this is an abandoned warehouse model I've downloaded from SKETCHFAB from Aurelian Martel. I'll link to this in the notes down below. But basically, this is a 3D environment, right? It's an actual model that we're going to bring into Blender. And so once we do that, and I'm going to make sure we're in material preview mode right here. Okay, and so now what we want to do is we want to go back down to that save function right here. We want to go to our user library. And in this case, we're going to do the same thing we did before, where we're going to start by adding a new category. And in this case, I'm going to call it just created HDRI. Say yes in order to create that category. And then in this case, what we want to do is instead of using our current background, we want to click on Panorama 360. And so what I want to do is I want to place my 3D cursor right here. So I'm just going to hold shift and do a right click, but then I'm going to click on add 360 cam on cursor. I'm going to move that up a little bit because it's basically going to use this as a 360-degree camera. I'm going to go ahead and delete out the C, but this is going to create an HDRI based on this location. And so now what I want to do is I want to click on this option for Panorama Save. So when we do that, it's going to ask us to name it. We'll just call this Warehouse. That's going to allow us to set things like our size in here. So the size of the image, I'm just going to do a 2K, as well as some other things like the kind of denoising it's going to use, other things like that. I'm going to go ahead and leave these as is. Okay, so what that's going to do is that's actually going to come in here and render out a 360-degree panorama based on that camera location using your model. Now, one thing I'm already noticing with this is I didn't set up enough lighting in here, so this isn't going to work very good as an HDRI, but we can still take a look at what this does, and then we'll go back in and fix it. And so once you're done, it's going to tell you that this is done, and you can click back in here. Well, notice what that did is that created a warehouse HDRI in here. Okay, and so remember that the lighting of your scene is actually going to be important. So this one that I created is actually too dark. I've come in here and just added some like really lazy lighting in here, just with like some area lights that are inside of this building, just to give you kind of an idea of what this might look like. But we're just going to do the same thing, where we're going to do another panorama save, and we're going to call this try 2. And then we're going to click on OK to try to render this out again. All right, so now if I jump into my user library, and in this case, we're under the created HDRI, notice how both those HDRIs I created are now in here as options. But I can click in here and I can actually add this as a background. So if I jump over into Eevee, and this is pretty low resolution, just because I kind of ran out of time on this video. But if I add this as a dome, notice how I can actually come in here and use the lighting from this HDRI that we created in order to actually light my scene. So notice how my shadow's moving around, other things like that. The lighting is actually coming from that HDRI that we were able to create from a 3D model, which is pretty cool. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove this really quick. And what I wanna do is, instead of adding in an HDRI, I want to add in lights instead. So what we can do is we can click on this lights option right here. We can actually click on the add button, and this will actually create like a lighting studio for you. And so notice what that does is that takes those lights and it allows you to bring in however many lights you want. And you can use either point lights, or you can also use spotlights or area lights, depending on what you want to do. That's kind of up to you, but you can use this in order to quickly and kind of automatically set up lighting in your scene. Notice how you can adjust like the Z value, which is how far out they are, using this little slider right here. So you can say we want these to be lower, higher, other things like that. You can also adjust where the target is, because the target's actually a 3D point in space that's close to your object, but you can use that in order to move the target around if you want to change that. And so you can also adjust the power of the different lights. You can either adjust these one at a time, so you can also click and drag down from the top down to the bottom in order to adjust the values of all of the lights at the same time. So in this case, right, we would want, or you could do like half of them too, just by clicking and dragging like this if you want to do the front or the back. So you can also adjust the size, as well as adding like a random color if you wanted to do that. You can randomize those as well. Now note that I don't think there's a way to just set them all back to white. Let me see. What you can do is you can click and drag in here, but I don't think there's just like a reset to single color option in here. So just be aware, if you click on the random color, that is going to randomize things, and you're going to have to go back and fix them if you don't want that. And there's a detailed tutorial on the Lighting Studio on the developers page as well, which I can link to in the notes down below. Then there's also an option in here that's designed to help you add volumetric fog. So if you go down into the volumetric section, you click on add, that's going to add in a volume that's going to add fog in your scene. And so if we zoom out and we look at this, notice this is adding an actual volume of fog in here, like this, and you can adjust things like the density of the fog, as well as things like the height. So like, for example, that fog is pretty high up here, so I could bring this down if I wanted to do that. But you can use this in order to add really strong fog or not so strong fog, as well as adjusting the color. So if you do want to add volumetric fog to your scene, this is definitely a tool that's going to allow you to use that. So just note that when you do try to render out that fog, that's obviously going to be a lot heavier because that's an actual volume in your space, but you can definitely render that out with cycles. And then if you want to get rid of the fog, you can just click on the remove button right here and you're back to normal. So I'm not going to lie, when I first looked at this add-on, I wasn't 100% sure why I needed something that could create HDRIs like this, but after using it a little bit, I'm actually a huge fan, especially of the dome function. It just makes the setup so easy, and the results actually look really good. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think about this add-on? I will link to this add-on on this page and in the notes down below as well if you want to check it out. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.